Let's review BenQ Mobiuz EX3210U display from a photographer perspective. I know many of us have been waiting for this, so let's get started. This is ArtIsRight. Before we start, subscribe if you're new and hit on the bell icon so you'll be notified every time I upload cool new videos like this. For full disclosure, I am BenQ Global Ambassador for their Pro Display lineup. All the opinions you're about to hear are definitely my own. Normally on this channel, I would be reviewing BenQ SCB display line, which are hardware calibrated display made for photographers and color critical workflow, or their PD line displays that are part of the Pro Designer series. This display is part of their Mobiuz series display, and it's a little bit different than the one that I have reviewed before. It is part of the entertainment and gaming display lineup, and normally when someone would approach this display review, they would be looking at it from a gamer perspective or from an entertainment perspective, watching video and using it for content consumption. What I want to address specifically with this EX3210U, because it has a lot of really neat features that cross into the realm of photography, is how would this display work in a pro photography workflow? Can it work in that capacity? And what do I think about it overall? So we're going to take a look at this display definitely from that perspective. Now, before we move on, you may have heard of Zowie by BenQ, and you may wonder, what is the difference between BenQ Zowie or Zowie by BenQ and this Mobiuz lineup? The answer to that question simply lies in the target group of users. For example, this Mobiuz line is really created for, just like I said, gaming and entertainment, whereas the Zowie display lineup is really created and made towards esport gamers. These are the individuals that care about any minutia in seconds that could have happened on the screen because you definitely want to win the tournament. And having those displays are definitely going to be important for that. The Zowie line displays use a different LCD panel technology in general compared to the Mobiuz lineup. The other thing about the Zowie panel too is that you are going to get a lower resolution panel, generally around 1080p, and they are panels that have amazingly high refresh rate. The Mobiuz lineup, it's going to strike the balance between the two. You are going to get a higher resolution display and also a higher refresh rate, both of which are not going to be quite as high as what the Zowie line can offer, but this is definitely unique and also more appropriate to, I would say, general users for the display. All right, that being said, what I want to do is approach this review a little different than I would normally do for the Pro Display lineup, and we're going to talk about the panel spec probably last in this review. So let's start out with the design and ergonomics. One of the things that this display definitely does come with is a remote. So BenQ Pro Display lineup definitely does have, for instance, a hotkey puck, however that is wired and is used to change different settings. This remote can do all those things. In fact, it also has sound control because on this display, BenQ also have built in their Trivolo speaker into the display as well, and it does sound pretty decent considering these are smaller speaker embedded in the display itself. You can change the input source, and there is also a power button on the display, so you can sit far back gaming with your wireless controller, turn on and off the display with the simple remote. This is a different approach to design than the Pro Series display. In addition to the remote, the display also have physical buttons on there too. Starting at the very far right, on the front, you will see a logo for HDRI and a button right below it. Press on that button and you have this quick HDR access menu. There is Gaming HDRI, Cinema HDRI, and Display HDR, which I will explain in the video what each of these HDR mode does. On the very bottom of the display, a little bit further from the HDRI button, there is going to be a button that lights up in white. This is circular and it is for power. Next up is a joystick, a tiny joystick that allows you to change, for example, the different customization for DisplayPort. I can choose, for example, DisplayPort Standard, which I wasn't before, Cinema, or DisplayPort Game. And I can go back to Standard again. So you can go in and customize all these settings based on what you want to use. The other thing is that if you push, for example, up and down, you can get access to all the different settings you can customize. And when you press and come down to the bottom to the menu, this is how you can access the full menu on the display. So if you close that out and you don't do anything, pushing forward and back will allow you to adjust the volume on the display. The button next to it will allow you to choose the input source on the display. Right now I have this set to DisplayPort, and the very last button allows you to mute the microphone or have the microphone being on and off, and you can certainly choose to use it from those buttons. So those are the physical buttons that are on this EX3210U. Now, the other thing we're going to have to talk about is just the design in general. Because I review so much of the Pro Display lineup, what we usually get are subdued colors that are just gray, nothing is flashy, nothing will take you away from the content that you're working on. And I will tell you right now that this Mobiuz EX display is definitely much more flashy than the SW and also PD line display. For instance, we get the Infinity edge on all three sides. On the bottom, we have this really nice shiny BenQ logo, whereas normally would be gray printed on the screen, for example, in the SW and PD line. And what we have on the bottom are the speakers, along with a infrared receiver for using with the remote. The stand itself is a very eye-popping design. You can really see that from the silver plastic that they use and the inlay on the inside that has almost this red carbon fiber-like look to it. The stand on the back, the vertical one, is a white and is more angular in nature. And this is pretty much the highest this display would go, which is in general, from my testing, around 2 to 3 inch lower than the max height that the SW display line can do. Bringing the display down to the lowest point, this is what you are going to get. Another thing to note as well is that if you want to use this display in a pro capacity and you like to use your display in a vertical orientation, well, pretty much you're stuck in horizontal because there is no way to rotate this display vertically. On the back of this display, it's pretty much all white. There are 4 LED strips, which are very neat. You can do different color effects to it, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later on. And I believe there is a sign that also says Mobiuz on the back too. Other than that, this display, I think it has a pretty good design. It is appropriate to be used more as an entertainment, as a gaming display. As far as using it for pro display, I think it is okay in that regard. Like I said, being used to the more subdued colors of the SW and PD line, I prefer more of the dark gray. This way you just get a chance to really focus on the content, but otherwise they will work for both. Now, this being said, I want to talk about the Trevolo speaker a little bit because there are different sound modes you can use. For example, there is FPS, which is first person shooting, full audio intensity. There is the RCG mode that is made for racing games, so you can get, really good engine rev. And there's also the SPG mode, which is crystal clear for sportcasting. So there's all these different sound modes that you can choose from, which I find rather interesting in this display. Now let's talk connectivity. This display have 2 HDMI 2.1 on the back along with a full DisplayPort 1.4. It also have 1 USB Type-B upstream and also 4 USB 3.0 downstream, which are Type A connection. A few things to note about the HDMI and DisplayPort connection is that when you are connecting to this display using HDMI, the max refresh rate you're going to be able to achieve is 120 Hz. Whereas with DisplayPort, you can achieve the full 144 Hz refresh rate that this display can offer. In addition to this, let's talk about some of the cables and also the power connection for this display. So it comes with an HDMI 2.1 cable, a full DisplayPort 2 full DisplayPort cable, and also a USB upstream cable that you can use, and all these cables are going to be around 6 feet long. In addition to this, it also comes with a power adapter and a power cord, and this is something that is definitely different from BenQ Pro display lineup because in those display, the power adapter itself is built into the display, whereas on this Mobiuz EX3210U, it is external, so you will have a power adapter external to the display, and you will use a barrel type connection from the power adapter to power on the display. One more thing to mention about connectivity on this display is that it lacks USB Type-C and any type of power delivery. However, if we look at the design philosophy for this display and the target audience, which is really made to be linked up with gaming consoles and also gaming PC, this makes perfect sense. The other thing too is that for most Mac users, you're not necessarily going to game too much on a Mac anyway. But if you want to use this with a Macintosh system, can you get the full 144 Hz? So I have tested this extensively, and yes, you can. I'll tell you how to do it. First of all, what I'd like to share with you is that I have tested this display extensively on Apple M1 chip, on all the varieties, including the new M2 chip as well. And I can tell you right now that there are no connection issues, no weird refresh rate, no dropping out of signal, anything like that. The display is fully compatible on a Mac system. Now, if your Mac computer should have an HDMI port on it, it is generally going to be HDMI 2.0 technology, which means the max refresh rate you're going to get, even if you use a compatible cable with the display, is 60 Hz. One thing to note is that with an HDMI cable, you can output the sound from the Mac to the Trivolo speaker. Now, in order to get the 144 Hz full refresh rate on the Mac, what you have to do is use some type of adapter. So you would have to use a USB Type-C to full display port adapter. This can be a dongle that you use or an inline adapter, which I generally recommend the latter. This is the one that I use for the connection that I am using with my 16-inch MacBook Pro right now. And I'll leave a link to the cable in the description below as well. But when you use this cable, you are able to achieve 144 Hz full refresh rate on this display using it with a Mac without any problems whatsoever. A few things to note though is that the sound cannot be sent over this USB-C to DisplayPort cable, so you're not going to be able to pipe the sound from your Mac to the Trivolo speaker in this kind of setup. It's one of those things where there are slight compromises there, but I thought you might want to know about them. Now let's talk about the panel, which is the star of the show. It is a 4K UHD 3840 by 2160 coming in at 31.5 inches, even though it is marketed at 32, it's being round up there, and the aspect ratio is 16:9. Nothing surprising there. I mean, the numbers that I'm sharing with you seems fairly normal. It is an IPS with local dimming backlight, and it has an angle of view of 178 degrees on both sides, so it still has this awesome angle of view from an IPS panel. The pixel density on this display is around 143 pixels per inch, or 140, somewhere around there, with a maximum brightness of around 600 nits. Now, when it comes to color gamut coverage, this is where this panel stands out. It has 99% Adobe RGB, 98% P3 color space coverage, and I am willing to go out and say that it would cover 100% sRGB and also Rec 709 as well. In addition to this, it also has support for HDR10 technology and also VESA Display HDR 600. And in addition to that, AMD FreeSync Premium Pro, so you can link it up with the gaming card from AMD or the video card from AMD for that matter. The native contrast for this display is 1001. It is fairly normal when you look at this display compared to any of the other ones that are out there. Let's quickly talk about the different color mode that comes built into this display before we talk about how you can get the 99% Adobe RGB. So starting out, this display comes with Cinema HDRI, which is designed to enhance any type of movie or TV show content consumption in HDR. Gaming HDR, which is designed to enhance scenery and also texture details in the scene. Display HDR, which is pretty much your typical HDR with one exception, is that this display has a DSP, a digital signal processing chip that can emulate HDR from an SDR source. It also has a few gaming modes that you can choose from, for example, first-person shooting, role-playing game mode, racing game, and book color mode that is designed to really match the color closely to what an Apple display, whether it is the one built into the laptop, an iPad, or iPhone would look like. E-paper, making the screen more subdued, cutting out the blue light, made it perfect for reading. sRGB color mode, and custom. And this is the last mode that you want to choose if you want to achieve the full 99% Adobe RGB coverage. What BenQ did not do with this display is that they did not calibrate this display from the factory with Adobe RGB. So there are a few things that you have to note when you want to go into this display and run the calibration in custom mode. It's not quite as straightforward. Based on my testing, you can't just go in and use, for example, Calibrite solutions to really go run the calibration and expect to get good result. There are some tweakings that you have to do, and I'm going to cover that in a separate video showing you how to calibrate this display, and based on my testing and all the tweaking adjustment, how to achieve the best result. With this being said, I believe that this panel is a 10-bit panel, again done via an 8-bit plus FRC, very similar to all the other panels that are out there, and very different from BenQ Pro Display lineup is that Out of the box, there is no report card whatsoever that tells you how the panel is performing. Obviously, this makes sense because it's not really designed or created as a professional color display, so it perfectly makes sense that it does not come with that. In addition, it does not have any of the certification, for example, CalMan Verify, Pantone Validated, because BenQ did not submit this for any of those certification. It's not really meant to be used in this scenario. But based on my uses so far testing this out in photography, I think that if you can really go in and tweak the calibration, it would work. Now, as far as how well this would work, I would probably say that if this is a display that's going to be a hybrid between entertainment, playing games on it, and also happen to use for light photography, for starting out photography, absolutely. However, if you are in a studio or in a full production environment and you're working with thousands of files at any given time, I highly discourage you from looking at this display, and I would probably look at BenQ SW display that have hardware calibration and capabilities, because those are definitely going to give you a much more consistent and better color in the long run. Can you use this display? Yes. Will it work out fine? I think so. However, like I said, when I'm working with a lot of images using these displays side by side, I tend to refer to my SW display more because I know the colors with hardware calibration on that display is absolutely accurate. Where these one, it is a little bit off here and there, particularly the white point on the display. No matter how I calibrate it, it tends to be just a slight warmer, for example, compared to my SW321C, which is the flagship BenQ SW display. A few more things I'd like to share about this display that will round this out as a pro display review. One of them is going to be backlight bleeding, uniformity, and also calibration, and the result that I'm able to get custom calibrating this display in different mode. Let's start out with backlight bleeding. Because this panel is still an IPS with localized dimming backlight, what we're still getting is the light bleeding around the edges. This is pretty much indicative of any IPS panel that are out there. It is fairly normal, and if you want to get less backlight bleeding to use in a pro workflow, then definitely I would consider the SW or the PD line display, which BenQ spends a lot more time minimizing backlight bleeding on those panels compared to this one. Next up is uniformity. For this test, I am using Calibrators Color Checker Profiler along with Color Checker Display Plus device to run this uniformity check. So based on this, what we can see with the Delta E 2000 value is that on the white, it pretty much passed when we set the threshold at 5. Now, a few things to note here is that on the left and the right side in the middle, the Delta E is encroaching on that 5 value already. It's a little bit high, and it does make sense, like I said before, that BenQ does not go in and do the uniformity calibration, because this is really not created for pro. Is really created for more entertainment and gaming, which all these values for entertainment and gaming is absolutely fantastic. Now, if we take a look in the gray, you can see clearly that on the left side in the center, it is just a little bit above 5. And if we go into the dark gray mode, it is a little bit above 5 on the opposite side, on the right side of the display in the center. These are just something to note. I still think that the values are fairly good from what you're seeing right now. And if we change this metrics to Delta E AB 2000, which I think is the more accurate Delta E value that you should be looking at anyway for any type of uniformity result. And for this, what we can see is that in the white, it passed just fine without any issues. In the gray, it passes just fine. And also lastly, in a dark gray, it does a really good job, with the highest on this display being around 3.2 Delta E. So I think that for uniformity, if you're looking to apply this in a photo editing workflow, it will work just fine. Now, a few more things I'd like to share is with regards to calibration, and I have gone in to calibrate this display in multiple different modes. So let me share some of the result with you, starting with the preset sRGB color mode that is inside this display. So based on my calibration, again, using Color Checker Profiler along with Color Checker Display Plus, I'm able to get a average Delta E of 0.5 and a max Delta E for all the patches around 1.9. So the color does look pretty good, although the gamut is limited because this is sRGB after all. When I've gone into MBook, I mean, the average Delta E is much higher at around 2.1 with a max of around 3.7. MBook, because Apple have tweaked their P3 color space much differently than the standard P3 color space itself, this makes sense that the Delta E value is a little bit higher because the program is trying to do this evaluation based on the standard P3 color space rather than the tweaked P3 color space that BenQ used and is also the one that Apple is using. Now, when I've gone in the custom mode to get the 99% Adobe RGB calibration, so without changing anything at all in that mode and just setting it to all default value, the average delta E I was able to achieve is 1.4 with the maximum delta E of around 2.5. However, a few things does pop out to me right away, and that is the color on this display is much more saturated, especially when comparing, for instance, to an SW display. And even if you don't have another reference display sitting next to it, you can tell right away that something is really off when you just use the custom mode and calibrate it as is. So you have to go in and tweak certain settings, and once I have done that, I'm able to achieve a much better color, something that looks fairly normal. And this is what I said earlier, that if you want to use this display in a professional capacity, I would say that if you're using this as a hybrid, that you're just a photography hobbyist, you're starting out in photography, I think that is absolutely perfect. I think that if you're a pro, I would definitely consider getting the SW display lineup because you can guarantee that the colors are definitely going to be consistent on those displays, more so than what you can get here. Although this is actually no slouch. So once I have gone in and tweaked some of the settings inside the custom setting, and I will make a calibration guide on this later on, so make sure you stay tuned and follow the channel for that. What I'm able to achieve is an average delta E of around 0.8 and the maximum delta E for all the patches at around 1.5. And I'm able to get the 99% Adobe RGB color space without having this be oversaturated. So like I said, it does work, but it does take a little bit more work for you to get the 99% Adobe RGB to work. Anyway, that is my thought and pro review, or pro approach review rather, for this BenQ Mobiuz EX3210U. If you have any questions about this, you would like to see something being tested further, or any thoughts about it, leave them in the comment section below. Give this a like, subscribe, and hit on the bell if you're new, and in art we trust.